This is Women Ending War, the podcast where you'll discover that there is another path, that peace is possible, and that the women here can lead the way. I'm Dr. Elana Sztokman. I'm here with Eva Dalak, my co-host. Welcome. Welcome to our podcast, Women Ending War. I'm Elana Sztokman.
And I'm Eva Dalak.
Assalamu alaikum, Eva.
Alaikum salam, shalom alechem.
And Eid Milad Saeed, Eva.
Toda.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Big 5-0.
Big 5-0.
That's really exciting.
It is, especially celebrating it here.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
It is really an honor. Thank you for being here on your, almost on your 50th birthday.
Yeah, thank you.
How do you
tomorrow,
feel?
July 9th. National holiday.
Should be a national holiday. Why not?
Absolutely. If it's for peace.
If it's for peace. We're dedicating Eva's 50th birthday to peace.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's activate peace.
Let's activate peace. That's the name of your company, right? Peace.
Absolutely. That's my project.
That's your project.
Peace activation.
Yeah.
Because we need to activate peace from within so that we can see it in the outside world. It doesn't happen outside. It happens inside. It's an inside work.
And you started peace activation after October 7th.
Yes. I was heartbroken and I asked Spirit, if there's one thing I could do, please show me. And I received guidance to launch open a Zoom with Rumi's quote, out there beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. And so the Zoom became the field where Palestinian-Israeli and anybody actually that was annoyed, disturbed, frustrated by what was going on, to come and share how they feel in the present. So it's a safe space where people come and share. Nobody's moderating, nobody's responding, and we just share our truth. And I hold a very strict, safe space where I would cut people if they start into political narrative. I'm only interested in personal narrative and for people to hear each other's in their truth. And one specific incident was a person, an Israeli Jewish person living in Costa Rica, saying how heartbroken she was that her sister, 18 years old, was going to go into the army. And she was so scared and she was concerned for her safety. And immediately after her share, a Palestinian woman from Gaza was sharing that she has just lost 72 persons from her family. And just the juxtaposition of both this narrative and for the Palestinian person is like not understanding how can you be concerned about your sister that is going to the army that is going to kill my family. And so these are the type of stories we hear. And that's what allows us to humanize the other, because we really need to remember we are all human sharing one earth, one humanity. And in this process, we've lost it. We're losing it. And the impunity with which Israel is conducting this genocide is really heartbroken, and not just for Palestinian. It's for Palestinian, for Jewish, for Israeli, for many, many people. And that's the truth, which is that there's no one truth. And as I was sharing earlier with you, I love Shlomo Arti's song, והאמת, שאין אמת אחת או שתיים, ציפור ברחה לי מהידיים.
One truth. His song is called Truth. There is no one truth.
Exactly. And that song, I think, exists from before. It's not a new song. So I think right now it's so relevant for us to remember that there's no one truth. And my truth is completely subjective, just like yours. And it's okay. And we can still be here together sharing this platform and sharing our perspective and listening to you.
Before we introduce our guest for today, we have a special guest today. I'm super excited. I just wanted to ask you one question from the previous episode that I feel like we didn't get a full answer to, which is I said to you, what is your vision? And I was wondering if you wanted to maybe finish that sentence. I might have interrupted you, and if I did, I'm sorry. But
no worries. My vision is to live as neighbors in deep respect for each other's truth. And I'm living it already in Costa Rica with neighbors that are Israeli. You've lived it in New York, and we've lived it everywhere except for Israel. And so for me, my vision is peace in the Middle East with compassionate self-forgiveness as the weapon.
Compassionate self-forgiveness. Yeah. That's something you don't hear often. What does that mean?
So compassionate self-forgiveness is to understand that what's killing us in this story is the judgment we hold on the other And actually, the judgment we hold on the other is basically based on the judgment we hold on ourselves. And that's part of the truth why Israelis have hard time to hear the Palestinian narrative, because that would put into question this story, the narrative with which they were born and programmed and manipulated on, like, this is a land of no people for people with no land. And so it justified, your presence here is justified and legitimized. So if you hear and believe the Palestinian narrative of dispossession, then you have to negate your own story and your own goodness. And as we shared earlier, it's really hard.
It's very hard.
It's very hard. It's very challenging.
Right.
And that's where I have compassion for that.
That's really interesting what you're saying, because it's true that people have from my experience is having these conversations, especially with Israelis and Jews from around the world also, it's very hard to hear Palestinian narratives because it's like, but I'm a good person. No, why are you saying I'm not a good person? I mean, and what I was thinking also in the previous episode, one of your first sentences, you use the word genocide. And here also you use the word genocide. And I know from my experience that for a lot of Israelis and Jews, the second they're going to hear the word genocide, they're going to be like, I'm out. I'm not having this conversation anymore. I'm not talking to you. We're not even having this kind of conversation. I can't hear that word. You get the same reaction when you use the word occupation. Some Israelis and Jews are like, you use the word occupation, that is such an offensive word. How could you say that about me? So there are a lot of like those trigger points where people are like, you're telling me I'm a bad person, so I'm not engaging with you anymore. So it's so interesting the way you're pointing that out and thank you for the compassion.
Yes.
And thank you for reminding us about the self-compassion also, because it is a hard process. It is a very hard process to be able to say, I and my people are doing something that, I think is wrong, and maybe I should be looking at it and it's wrong, and like I have to hold that, and I have to hold that truth, and I have to hold that reality.
While still believing that you're a good person. And for me, that's the key. That doesn't negate you being a good person. It's just that there's a dissonance and fragmentation and schizophrenia to say, okay, I am a good person. So if I'm a good person, then it's not possible that I am doing this to these people. So probably I'm not doing this to these people. And so that's the only way where we can coexist. But actually, it's understanding that this judgment on the other is a judgment on ourselves. And I have to accept reality as is. And reality as is, since 1948, Palestine doesn't exist. Palestinians are under occupation. And even Palestinians within Israel don't have full rights. And so it's really, I feel like there's a war on terminology rather than, and denial of the reality on the ground, rather than watching it with compassion. And that's why my vision is like to be able to hold this narrative in multiple truth in one heart, while at the same time healing the trauma of the people on this land, healing the trauma of the land, and understanding that we can do that. It's not complicated. We can do that.
I also really appreciate humanizing everybody, even, no matter what their identity is, no matter what their politics are. And that's also hard. I just want to point out a different perspective that I hear a lot. There's a lot of stories about anti-Semitism around the world, and there are a lot of stories about, Jews being like kicked out, or like somebody will, announce any Jews here, or any Zionists here, or any Israelis here, you're not welcome, you're being kicked out. And that's also a very, very hard thing.
Absolutely.
And also I feel like it goes to the same kinds of dynamics you're describing that have to do with like taking a person and suddenly I am not just who I am like responsible for everything that my representatives are doing in my name, whether or not I have anything to do with them, whether or not I believe in them. Even if I've dedicated my life to trying to get my leaders to stop doing that, I'm still responsible and I'm still evil and I still don't deserve to be in the room. That's hard.
That's hard.
That is really...
I agree. That's very hard. And it's a pity that Palestinian liberation is equated with anti-Semitism, because it's not. I mean, Palestinian and Israelis are both Semit people. And Arabic and Hebrew is coming from the same, same source. And so you cannot blame Palestinian to be anti-Semitism. At the same time...
Right. No, I think what you're saying is important. Like, I have this conversation a lot too, which is that, like, if somebody is saying, Israel should be doing this differently. Israel, like when I all the time, I say Israel needs to get out of Gaza. I've been saying this for like ages, since almost like the beginning. Like, what are we doing in Gaza? That doesn't make me anti-Semitic.
Absolutely.
It doesn't make me anti-Jewish. It makes me saying, I want Israel to do things differently, And so I say we, meaning like my people, I wish that we would learn how to distinguish between, criticism of Israeli policies and, actual hatred of Jewish people. Mm-hmm. So, because those are two, sometimes they overlap. There is an overlap, like you say, like sometimes these things like bleed into each other. I mean, maybe bleed is too charged of a word here, but it's like they overlap into each other, and that is very, very unfortunate because it stops the real conversation. It stops us from really being able to engage with honesty and authenticity, and because we're so triggered into our triggered places and into our victim places and all those things, and so that's the end. That's the end of the conversation.
And I think triggers, peace activation is all about the triggers. And what I teach is sit with your trigger. You're triggered? Great. You're angry? Great. Sit with it. And come into compassion and self-forgiveness so that you can hear the other. And I really believe that it's so important to hear the other.
Okay, thank you for that. I love your peace activation. I've been there a bunch of times, and it's really, really a beautiful space. Okay, so today I want to take a deep dive into something that's obviously very important to this conversation, which is the location of women in leadership and the almost complete absence of women in leadership positions. There were no women on the war cabinet. There are no women in military leadership. There are no women around the table in any of the negotiations. I mean, the list goes on and on. So we have here today our esteemed guest, Stav Salpeter, who works for an organization called Itach Maaki Women Lawyers for Social Justice. Itach Maaki means you, with you, in feminine form, with you in Hebrew and Arabic, Itach Maaki. And Itach Maaki has been on the forefront for many, many years of advancing women's leadership in negotiations, in politics, in diplomacy, and also in grassroots movements and lots of other things. So, Stav, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure. So, could you tell us, so this week actually is a really interesting week for Itach Maaki because you started a new campaign about women's leadership, right? There are two massive dolls, blow-up dolls in the middle of Tel Aviv, right?
Women. That was awesome.
Yeah. Okay, we'll put a link to it here in the podcast.
Amazing. Yeah, two huge 4-meter tall two-faced dolls as well. So you have 4 dolls, almost 4 women standing, and not allowing anyone to ignore them in the center of this very public space. And this is a campaign that we're launching to end a project that we've been running for a few years now with the Jerusalem Center for Women, which is a Palestinian women's rights organization based in the West Bank. And together we've been training over 100 women in peace negotiations and how to take part in peace negotiations from a gendered perspective. 100 Palestinian and Israeli women from a range of different backgrounds. So we have women who are, from different communities. So we have Bedouin women, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi women, Christian and Muslim Palestinian women, women from various socioeconomic backgrounds, but also women from a range of professional backgrounds. So we have senior news correspondents, senior civil servants, senior academics. And the idea is really to bring this diversity of voices into peace and security negotiations. Because as you mentioned, Itach Maaki has been working since 2005, right? When Israel adopted UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. Itach Maaki has been working with a range of women's rights organizations in Israel and Palestine to make sure that there's actually an implementation plan for this legislation, which we still haven't seen.
Can we just pause for a second to explain what 1325 is, because not everybody knows what it is.
So UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security really talks about the need to integrate women's voices into peace negotiations and into decisions made about security. So it's about integrating both their perspectives, so gendered perspectives, a gender mainstreaming into these decisions, but also bringing the women themselves into the rooms where these decisions are taking place. And it's been proven across the world, right, that once women take part in negotiations for peace, the peace agreements are much longer lived, or they have much more sustainable because there's more community buy-in. I don't think it's because women are much more calm or peaceful than men or people of other genders. I just think that once there's broader representation of society in the negotiation table, then the decisions that are made are able to really apply to a wider range of members of society. And
Absolutely.
then it's able for it to be longer lived.
So you're saying it's about the diversity. It's about
Diversity, and I think women are weavers. They weave community, and as we mentioned in the previous episode, I think they're more participatory and inclusive and community-oriented. So the diversity would come not from all women, as we said. It's not just because you're a woman, but I think like the approach would be more participatory and inclusive.
I once heard a talk from an Irish guy. I can't remember his name. It's unfortunate I can't remember his name, but he was very involved in Irish peace talks for like decades. And he gave this talk in Jerusalem, a couple of years ago, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, in which he was describing how the first time that women were in the room, he said, for 20 years, there were never any women in the room. And then because of 1325, suddenly there were these sort of like, corrective measures to bring women in. He said, as soon as women walked in, the whole room changed. So everybody sort of like sat up a little bit differently. They just sort of like looked around a little bit differently. They kind of like controlled their voices a little bit more. It was just sort of like it went from being like an assumed,
Man's
boys' club,
yeah,
to something else. They had to like be on better behavior. That's what he said. I was fascinated.
It's so interesting, actually. The Northern Irish example is one that we really draw on in our work as well. And I think it was one of the precursors, really, to 1325, this NIWC, the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. Right, where you brought together Protestant and Catholic women. And somehow they were also able to find common ground on the shared basis of, their own struggles with the patriarchy. And so I think really having this intersectional approach where we can bring in and see the different structures of oppression that you were mentioning earlier, Eva, right, in our societies, and seeing where do we have commonalities here? What are the oppressions that apply to all of us? And how can we, as societies, work in order to topple them, to break them down, to democratize them.
And it's an approach that has been applied in many different conflict zones, actually. Like I remember the Great Lake region, Burundi and Rwanda's women, Hutu and Tutsi, were coming together on the woman-specific agenda. And I think that's what is missing here. We're seeing we have internalized patriarchy in Palestine, Israel, and rather than seeing we're all suffering from the same disease, we're like fighting over who's gonna write the prescription for this disease. Like, who cares? It's the disease and we're all suffering from it.
So this raises another interesting question. Does war affect women differently?
Absolutely. Do you want to say more about that? And I can share from other examples.
Yeah, would love to hear. I mean, I think 100% right. I think war affects people who are most marginalized in society in different ways in general, right? People who are already vulnerable, who are already invisible to decision makers, become harmed much more by the war and are left out often by policies that try to remedy the impact of the war. And we've seen this throughout our war. Throughout our work, during the war. So we've recently published this report from our Legal Aid Centre, which receives over 2,000 calls of women who are marginalised on the basis of, their socioeconomic status, their geographic location in the country, their ethnic background. And we've seen patterns in the calls that have been coming in since the war, because we've seen a staggering rise. And there are many issues that women face in society that don't apply in the same way to men, and women from marginalized communities especially. So we've seen, for example, Palestinian citizens of Israel face rising cases of being dismissed from their jobs, right, or having insecurity in their jobs in general because of their political statements that
or even
made.
physical violence. I mean, I have a friend in Yafo actually who she goes with a hijab, and she was physically attacked during the first week of the war by some local yeshiva students. So Arab women especially who have that visibility of otherness, as it were, in our society are very vulnerable also to all kinds of discrimination, the economic discrimination and the physical threat. There are women also you hear who are afraid of like going out and afraid of going to their jobs and things like that. So the war definitely brings that kind of legitimizes hatred, it legitimizes discrimination. I mean, that first month we had mayors, the mayor of Bat Yam and the mayor of Givatayim, who said, we're going to make sure that no Arabs work here. We're going to have a city that's free of Arab workers, things like that. So in that sense, the war definitely heightens discrimination, and women who have multiple vulnerabilities will face that vulnerability in many ways.
I think also we don't realize, because it's subtle, war affect women differently because there's a legitimization of violence. So actually what we've seen in different conflict zones, and including Israel and Palestine, is a rise in domestic violence and sexual violence. And we talk about 1325, but there's a series of UN Security Council resolution, and one of them is 1826, I think, that is specifically targeting sexual violence as a tool in conflict. And I think we underestimate how much it affects the oppressor and the oppressed. I think Israeli women also suffer from violence because there's a legitimization of violence by the men, by the soldiers, and also of women soldiers. And so it's actually on both sides.
And also, of course, on October 7th itself, there was a massive, sexual violence was a major part of the attack on Israel on October 7th. So we have that element also that I think many Israelis are still traumatized by in all kinds of different ways. And then, of course, there was the whole issue of the world not being so willing to talk about it, even UN women. There was a lot of conflict around that, which is very hard to come to terms with. But what it showed for sure is that definitely war heightens violence against women. Also because most of the warriors are men. And that's not to say there aren't women in soldiers also in Gaza there are, but the overwhelming majority of the fighters everywhere are still men. And you have lots and lots of men. You have guns everywhere. You go to the park in Israel and you see, parents of young kids with guns 24/7, and that can't be good. And then you have Ben Gvir, who's making it easier for people to get guns, and he's withdrawing the restrictions against men who have a history of domestic violence, and literally making it easier to put guns in their hands. I mean, these are terrifying things. Yeah. So.
And I think these are really scary.
Did I interrupt you? No, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I think they're very scary, very kind of visceral examples, right, of how the war leads to sexual-based violence, as you've discussed, on October 7th, and also all the imagery that's been coming out of Gaza of soldiers with women's lingerie from houses that they've taken over and kind of playing around with it on their weapons.
I missed that.
It's horrifying. You're lucky for having missed it.
And also a soldier obliging women to striptease and Palestinian traditional women.
Too.
Oh yeah. There's lots of, I think it's interesting because we refer to October 7 as the date of, the reference point, but this has been going on since 1948, and a lot of sexual violence against Palestinian women have taken place in a lot of the massacres, but it just wasn't publicized as it is right now. And in a way, we're privileged because of social media. And what social media right now is able to show, and people are using that and abusing that, unfortunately. But we are in a position where we cannot say anymore, we didn't know or we haven't seen, because it's all over. And it is a choice not to see right now and to deny it. And I think it's not just on one side, it's actually on all sides. And it's important to remember that it's not a question of sexual violence against Palestinian women or sexual violence against Jewish women. There's sexual violence,
right.
And that's what the UN resolution heightened, especially after the example. It actually came to be after the Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict. That was the first time that they saw that the other community was using sexual violence because they knew how important it is, what women symbolize in the sacredness and the belonging. And that's why I say it's like internalized patriarchy.
Right.
It's basically considering, woman is the property of man. And so if I attack the woman of the other, I'm attacking the other.
Right. It's from 1973, Susan Brownmiller's book, War, Women and Rape, Women, War and Rape. Oh, I'm forgetting the name of the book. You know, Susan Brownmiller wrote about this in 1973, how rape is a weapon of war. It's not even about the sex. It's about using rape as a weapon. So it's been used.
And women's body are the battleground. This is like ridiculous. And that's like the ultimate of use of internalized patriarchy.
Right. So this goes also to the issue in 1325. There's a whole thing about redefining security, right? And here in Israel, you know, we talk about security with a very, very specific meaning. And it's missing all of this, right? The women's perspectives on personal security are completely absent from, and just to give you an example, actually, also about the whole thing with October 7th and sexual violence. So it was really strange to me. I wrote a blog about this also. I wrote more than one blog about this because it was such a big thing. How you had these like very right-wing Republican American men standing up for Israeli women, saying, oh, look, Israeli women are victims of sexual violence by Hamas, right? As if now we care about sexual violence. And it's like, well, you know, 1 in 3 Israeli women is going to be a victim of sexual violence in her life, statistically speaking. And all the rest of them are not going to be victims of Hamas, but of probably men who they might even know or have dated or have, you know, been friends with. You know, are you like interested in that at all? Or is the story of sexual violence only interesting when it fits into your particular definition of security, which is definition of security is terrorism by the other, by them, the enemy, as opposed to are you actually interested in women and women's lives and women's bodies and women's experiences and what we go through on a daily basis, whether there's a war or not?
You're not. Absolutely not. What they're interested is how can we take it as an instrument, and use it and manipulate it for our own power.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what we've been trying to do with this campaign as well, is to redefine and broaden this notion of security in society and really invite the society coming to the protest, but beyond, to take part in this conversation and talk about what security means to them. Because I think, you know, there's this security related to gender-based violence, which we've been discussing, but there's also nutritional security. There's security of, you know, the women that we work with in the unrecognized villages who don't feel secure in their homes because they don't know whether they will be demolished. There's so many kinds of security that impact our lives and the stability that we feel within them that are all impacted by the layers of conflict that all of us are subject to in this land.
Important. It's so important. So important what you're talking about. Can you tell me a little, can you tell us a little bit about the program and the kinds of women who you're encouraging to, or you're training, not encouraging, you're training women to find a seat around the table, which is not so simple. And as Eva said in the last episode, even getting a seat around the table is not the end of the struggle.
Absolutely.
Then you have a whole bunch of other challenges after that. But can you tell us, I'd love to hear about the women themselves. You know, what are they bringing to the table? Why is it so? Because a lot of times you also hear like, you know, there are no women of that caliber. They don't have the right experience. You know, you hear
a lousy argument.
Common. I think, I mean, that's why my colleagues started the negotiation training program a few years ago, right? Because that was the argument they were getting. There is, you know, when they were coming to the governments and to ambassadors and saying there aren't enough women around these negotiation tables, they were being told, well, there aren't enough qualified women. And so they went to find and train these qualified women and make sure that, you know, now many of our graduates are involved in track 2 negotiations. Our graduates have set up the 1325 forum, right, to discuss issues relating to women, peace and security.
And by track 2, you mean informal.
Right, informal.
Track 2 is like the sort of back room, back channels. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. They're like very vague, very artistic notions of what is track 2, what is track 1.5, what is track,
there a track?
Apparently, yes. And so they've been taking part in other individual initiatives as well to highlight the needs of their community. So, for example, Ghadir Hani, who is one of our graduates, you know, together with my colleagues, went to ambassadors and raised the issue of violence within Palestinian communities in Israel and the lack of policing and the lack of structures provided by the government to prevent this rise in crime. And so it's been really great to see that after the training as well, women have been taking the matters into their own hands and creating initiatives wherever they could, whether that is through negotiations, whether that is through civil society initiatives, whether that is through advocacy with ambassadors. I think it's important in this context, though, not only to think about those women, right? The women who we've had our negotiation training with, who often are already in positions of power in society, whether in academia or in civil society or in government. We've also been working with women whose voices are completely invisible to decision makers. We have programs in local authorities.
Oh, like the Bedouin women? You want to talk about
the Bedouin women as well.
Can you tell us about what you've done with Bedouin women?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really an issue that has been under-discussed in the war. We started a joint Jewish-Arab emergency relief center at the very beginning of the war, in that environment that you were mentioning, where, it felt unsafe for many of my Palestinian colleagues to walk around in shared cities, in Jewish majority cities. It felt unsafe because of that discourse that you were describing, that was not only in local authorities, but also in the Knesset. And so creating this joint initiative that on the one hand was meant to directly provide food security, which isn't something that we as an organization do, right? We don't do humanitarian aid as a legal aid, an advocacy civil society organization, but we saw the needs on the ground and came there together with a coalition of other organizations. But in addition to that, the idea of the center was really to create a space for this narrative and to create a space that allows decision makers to show support for this narrative. So we had hundreds of Jewish and Palestinian volunteers. So it was a joint project. We gave out thousands of packages of food and essential supplies to Bedouin and Jewish communities in the area. And all of this project was very much led by women. And not just any women. The women who we have been working with are the Nishmayat movement of women leaders from the unrecognized villages. This is a network that my colleague, Hanan Asana, who is amazing, and I really recommend everyone look up after this. She set up this network in 2013.
We'll link to it.
Yeah, amazing.
We'll
Happy to send more information. And the main idea of the network in 2013 was to encourage women in the unrecognized villages to take part in elections, to vote. Because at the time, there were only 4% of women who were voting. And by 2019, she managed to raise that number to 22%.
Which, by the way, Bedouin women have zero representation in the Knesset. Through all of Israel's history, Bedouin women are one of the communities that have had absolutely zero representation, which is like a shocking statistic when you think about it.
And can you tell more about, I don't think the public would know what is unrecognized villages. Or maybe you want to say a couple of words on this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So the unrecognized villages, there are about 300,000 to 170,000 Bedouin citizens of Israel, and about 100,000 of them live in unrecognized villages. There are villages, 35 of them, that are not recognized by the state and don't have access to normal services. So, they would have electricity lines going over their head without having access to electricity within the villages. In the war, what this means is that they don't have access to shelters. They're not given any shelters within their villages. They are not even, they don't have the siren. Right. So the Iron Dome system doesn't work in these villages. When
we were attacked by Iran, the only person who was injured was a Bedouin girl, because the Bedouin community did not have any safe rooms.
Exactly. Amina, she was the only one who was injured, 7 years old, injured from shrapnel in her home. And this is women, peace and security, right? This is showing why women and women from marginalized backgrounds especially are the ones who are hardest hit by conflict. I remember being scared in my bed, calling my partner all night in this attack, and I think all of us were very, very scared. But the stories that were coming to us from the women leaders who we work with in the Negev, I actually wrote one of them down, so I would love to share it with you if you're happy, because I think it's better for the women to speak in their own words rather than me trying to convey their stories. But the stories that were coming were horrible. My colleagues were receiving calls throughout the night of this attack. Women were saying, we don't know where to go. They were driving. One of them drove to a school because they thought maybe the school would have a shelter. The school was locked, so they had to drive to a different school. And many people were hiding under bridges in the middle of the night, right? Hiding under highway bridges, hoping that this is what is going to save them. In this country that has seen enough wars to be able to provide its citizens with shelters, right? And since October 7th, there's been an even added campaign that has been going on for many years before that to provide these villages with shelters. Of course, to no avail.
To do that, it has to start with recognition.
Yes.
Right? To
yes.
be unrecognized is already tells you everything.
And it's very hard to advocate for recognition with a government where, our Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, was one of the founders of Regavim, which is an organization that works tirelessly to advocate against the unrecognized villages in a very, very racialized way as well, right? Showing maps from the sky of, look at them spreading horrible... Them, yeah. It brought up really horrible connotations for me seeing all these videos. Jewish Israelis putting on Bedouin Arab accents to mock people from these communities in their kind of advocacy videos. Horrifying. So our Minister of Finance is one of the people who set this up. And of course, a few weeks ago, we've seen house demolitions. But anyways, going back to this horrible evening of the Iranian attack, Noor Al-Nasara from the Al-Sira village shared about her experience of getting under one of those bridges. A lot of us had crowded there, including little children, pregnant women, and the elderly. The most difficult part for me was to watch the ill and disabled undergo this experience. My neighbor's daughter is disabled, and somehow, I don't know how, we were able to lower her under the bridge. Another neighbor is reliant on an oxygen tank. These are individuals who must have a local shelter. They cannot start looking for a place in times of duress in the middle of the night. It's very difficult to watch the distress of the children. I'm a grandmother, and seeing my children in such distress, it drives me crazy.
It's break my heart. It's heartbreaking.
And also, women have those experiences, not just of like ourselves, but also as mothers and grandmothers and just caretakers. And so these experiences are multiplied. And because, like, as we were saying last time, because women are so trained and socialized into all of that caretaking. And, so we carry all of these, we carry, what our children and grandchildren and neighbors.
And
elders, we carry it all. And so, when a woman walks into that room at the negotiating table, she's carrying lots of stories and lots of perspectives that until then are unseen,
Unseen, uncared for.
Exactly. Unrecognized, unacknowledged.
Yeah, and needs as well, right? That just are invisible otherwise. So in these joint emergency relief centers, one of the things that we didn't think about handing out was blankets until the women were saying, look, a child of ours, was burnt last night because we don't have access to electricity and it's the middle of winter and we have fireplaces in the middle of our homes. We need blankets. And that wasn't something that was generally being provided. And these kind of very small needs that on a larger scale in society have huge implications are what we need to see our leaders listening to and taking into consideration.
Yeah. I want to also say something else about that motherhood, grandmotherhood thing, is that I feel like as a mother and grandmother, I feel like something about war works to disempower us, to like try to make us passive. Like, we're supposed to be the ones who like stay back and just sort of accept passively what the big important people are deciding for us. It really relegates us to the one who does the laundry, the one who does the cooking, the one who feeds the fighters. Our children, our sons are out there fighting, and our job is to make sure they're like well fed, not to think. Our job is not to think about anything. I belong to a whole bunch of different mother groups, and there's a whole series of like mothers of soldier groups of mothers who are trying really hard to end this war. And to be a mother of a soldier ending the war is a big taboo. The mothers of the soldiers are supposed to be quiet.
And supportive.
And sort of docile, subservient. And so it's what's interesting, what comes up a lot in these groups is whenever like there's a media interest or something and they say, oh, does anybody want to be interviewed? Or they're always like, no, I can't say these things out loud because, then my son might hear it and stuff like that. Even me saying it here, I'm also worried about my kids hearing it, okay? Because my job as the mother, grandmother is to support. Do the laundry, do the cooking, and support. And it reminds me of, I brought this book with me because I was thinking about it yesterday. There's this book I have called Women at the Window. It's a midrash book. It's a book about commentaries on sort of biblical texts. And the women at the window image comes from the story of Deborah. Deborah was the judge, and she was the only woman leader in all of Israel's history, of all biblical history. She was the only one who led all of Israel. And she led this war against the Canaanites, and then after that there was peace for 40 years. But it's considered this sort of feminist tale because she's actually fighter warrior. Then there's Yael, who's also another woman who's shown. But in hers, and then she has a song. There's a song afterwards, and in the song she mentions Sisera's mother, and Sisera was the enemy general, and it talks about Sisera's mother waiting by the window for Sisera to come back. And of course, Sisera didn't come back because Yael killed him with this, the spear, this peg to the head. It's a sort of dramatic, famous story, and a story of women doing all kinds of things, including fighting, yes? But in this book, it's by Nechama Ashkenazi. The book is 30 years old almost already. But this image keeps coming to my head of the woman at the window as this sort of she talks about it as this passive thing. Should I read a little passage from this? Would that be interesting to you? It's about Sisera's mother. She says, Sisera's mother, woman at the window, is by necessity a conformist, occupying the position of the spectator assigned to her by the male community. By acquiescing to her position at the window, she helps uphold a system in which men run public life, engage in the affairs of the world, and make decisions that would inevitably affect her own life and fate. At the same time, she is eagerly looking out, hoping to participate in the lives of men, if only vicariously. Her far-off gaze means that the center of her existence is not the room in which she turns her back, but the remote, unattainable, and exciting male arena.
Wow.
Anyway, this is what...
That's internalized patriarchy for you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Totally.
I always thought that it was so funny that at the UN we were working hard to include more women in the military versus stopping the military. Just engaging more women in peacekeeping missions in position.
That's a big feminist dilemma in Israel.
Yeah.
Israeli feminists argue about this, about whether or not we should be trying to equalize gender in the military or taking a whole different strategy and getting women to lead to a whole different path. So
I think that's a great sentence to end with,
yes.
and invite someone that would dive deep with us on this. Oh. Can we create a women agenda, a women or peace? And I think that's what made the Liberian women movement win, as well as the Irish women movement win. It's a women agenda for peace.
A different agenda. It's changing the rules.
Changing the rules,
Changing
expanding the box, and managing infinite possibilities.
Right. So before we end, I want to introduce one last thing, I want to end with one last thing, which is, I think, the perfect thing to end with here, which is that Rachel Poland Goldberg, she's the mother of hostage Hirsch Poland Goldberg, she wrote a poem, and she said this poem. The poem is called To All the Boys in the Room. To all the boys in the room. Speaking of ways that, by the way, women are affected by the war, there's also this issue of hostages, and they've been there for 9 months and they've experienced sexual assault. So that is, but yeah, okay, enough said. But we know what that means. So she's very concerned about that. I've heard her speak a whole bunch of times, and she's always saying, what is happening to those women being held hostage? So anyway, so she's a big believer in the idea that the negotiating room should be filled with mothers from all sides. She says if mothers would be in the room, this would all have been over a long time ago. So anyway, so she has this poem. So we're going to leave with a link to the poem, and we're going to sign off.
I've written a poem. It is called To the Boys in the Room. To the boys in the room, There are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent civilians suffering terribly in Gaza. But I only know one of them. He and I share the same DNA, and we are both left-handed. Oh, now only one of us is left-handed. And he lived and grew inside of me for 9 months, many moons ago. To the boys in the room, every folktale begins with the 4 words, once upon a time. And every deal or negotiation that you think of crafting should begin with one word, hostages. To the boys in the room, to motivate and incentivize you, you will now be asked to hand over one of your family members, your spouse, your father, your sister, your son, your brother, your daughter, your mother, your grandfather. If he has already passed on to the next world, we will supply you with a shovel. We will then hold on to your beloved one and treat them exactly as our beloved have been treated until you come up with a plan for how to get these people back. And I reckon it will take you less than 184 days. To the boys in the room, our Father, who art in heaven, call him by any name you wish. He will be home soon, and boys, just you wait till your father gets home.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Stav.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Lana.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. It's always really great chatting with you.
Yeah.
And it was great chatting with you and hearing all your amazing insights and about the work of Itach Maaki, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And this is honestly, I'm really excited to hear all of this podcast when it comes out. I think it's going to be fascinating. And these are exactly the kinds of conversations that we need to be having.
Yeah, hard
Exactly.
conversations with a
Yes.
big heart.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye for now.